Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're taking a first look at week 3 of the NFL season over on Draftkings. All I do in this video is I take a handful of players I like at each position, and then I throw them into the player pool and we talk about the matchups, the pricings, the Vegas totals, and all that fun stuff. So we'll get into the more in-depth stuff later on in the week, like core plays and whatnot. But as of right now, kind of just looking at some general things to start the week. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. We're all season long trying to help you guys become better NFL DFS players that cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you want to follow me on social media, my handle's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you miss more content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. We got around 300 members. And you can hop into the Discord chat, ask me questions, and hang out during the games or all that fun stuff. And you get access into my entire NFL DFS datasheet, which has pretty much all the information you're going to need heading into the weekend. And everything's nice and color-coded, so it's pretty easy to read. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, that's fine. Let's just dive into this week's slate. So we'll start off with the quarterbacks, and we got quite a few good options. And it's looking like I'm going to spend a little bit up at quarterback. I typically like to spend down. But the quarterbacks this week are, there's some really juicy matchups here for some of these expensive guys and some really high Vegas totals as well. We'll start with the nuts game, which is going to be the Seattle Seahawks versus the Dallas Cowboys. We have a 55.5-point over-under, which is massive. And the Seahawks have a 30-point implied team total, so 4.5-point favorites here at home. And Russell Wilson has been absolutely flawless this season. If you're looking at his overall numbers, the first 2 games, over 300 yards passing per game and 4.5 touchdowns passing per game as well. Only 31 pass attempts, but 9.8 yards per attempt and an 82% completion percentage and 140 QBR rating. He has just been absolutely fantastic, and this is going to be a very high-scoring game. The Cowboys played at a pretty quick pace, and Vegas has the Seahawks as a 30-point implied team total, which is tied for the most with the Arizona Cardinals, and I have a lot of interest in Kyler Murray, which I will talk about in a little bit. But I definitely want exposure to this game. The wide receivers are wildly underpriced in this game, so it's not that hard to stack these guys up. If you're using Dak, you can stack them up with CD Lamb, even Michael Gallup, or Amari Cooper. And if you're running back with someone like DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett, or on the flip side, if you use Russell Wilson, you can pair him up with Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, or even both. Then you could run it back with someone like Amari Cooper or CD Lamb. So very easy to stack this game, which was a mistake by DraftKings. So that's going to lead to some chalky stacks in tournaments. So if you want to pivot off of that, I understand. But just as numbers-wise and just on paper, this game should be absolutely awesome for DFS purposes. And a pretty close spread as well. Now, Seattle does like to run the ball a bit, but Russ just tends to be so efficient, and even though the numbers say he shouldn't be throwing these many touchdowns over the course of the careers, he just does it. So yeah, I definitely have some interest in Russ. If you're looking at how the Cowboys have done so far this season versus the past, and these DVOA numbers, I did not have it updated the first 2 weeks because it's only a 2-week sample size, or a 1-week sample size for last week. So now we got 2 weeks. I did update the DVOA numbers and some of the other numbers as well. But so far, the Cowboys are 18th DVOA versus the pass, allowing 20 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, 270 passing yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. So Russell Wilson in this game is just absolutely elite for DFS purposes. So you're definitely going to want to get some exposure, some way, somehow to it. Dak Prescott 7,200. So the Cowboys, on the flip side, they are 4.5-point underdogs on the road here, which means they should be able to have to throw the ball quite a bit. And I know last week we thought that was going to be the run game, since they were a little bit slight favorites, that I thought maybe they'd get to a point where they don't have to throw the ball quite a bit. Well, they got into a huge deficit early on, and they had one of the probably the best games of the entire season. Somehow the Cowboys, they got the onside kick because the Falcons guy forgot to pick up the ball, and that game was just absolutely nuts. And Dak did start slow, but he ended the game on fire. I think he had nearly 45 DraftKings points, just absolutely crushed. And look, again, I'm going to like him once again. It's very easy to stack him up with his weapons. We have a 55.5-point over-under. They're 4.5-point dogs here. Still have a pretty good 25.5 implied team total. If you're looking at his numbers for the first 2 games so far this season, over 350 yards passing per game, 43 passing attempts per game, and just overall he's got some good weapons to throw to. And Seattle's not been that great through the air so far, or versus the air this season so far. 29 DVOA versus the pass. 33.3 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks. Just got shredded by Cam Newton on Sunday night. And over 420 passing yards per game as well. Now, they've had to face Cam Newton and Matt Ryan, which are 2 pretty good quarterbacks so far. But Dak Prescott's also a very good quarterback. So definitely like Dak here. And you can't go wrong with either Russell Wilson or Dak Prescott. If I had to pick one, I'm probably going to side with Dak, but it's very close and you're just splitting hairs. As of right now, I don't have a strong lean as it's only Tuesday. And we still have quite a ways to go until Sunday morning. but definitely like both options. But my favorite quarterback in the week is going to be Kyler Murray at 6,800. I hate saying that so definitively on Tuesday, but it's going to be hard not to like Kyler here. I mean, the guy's just kind of like Lamar Jackson light for the most part if you're looking at last year. But the Cardinals have a 30-point implied team total. They're playing at home here versus Detroit, who's just got a pretty awful defense. And this game is right behind the Dallas-Seattle game. They have a 54.5-point over-under, 30-point implied team total, like I just said, which is tied for the most with the Seattle Seahawks, and only a 5.5-point spread. So if this game stays close, Kyler Murray should have a huge game here. And even if it doesn't stay close, I still think Kyler's going to have a really good game. He was fantastic last week. He was good in the first start. And what I like the most is he's running the ball quite a bit here. He's averaging 79 rushing yards per game so far, over 10 rushing attempts per game, and nearly 2 rushing touchdowns per game as well at a 7.5 yards per carry clip. And through the air, he's not doing too much damage through the air, but he's throwing the ball 39 times per game, 258 passing yards per game, and a passing touchdown per game. But I like the rushing upside he gives us, and this is a fantastic matchup versus Detroit. They're 24th DVA versus the pass this season, allowing over 20 DraftKings points per quarterbacks, 2.5 passing touchdowns per game, and they're not that great versus the run either. So Kyler Murray pretty much checks every box for me. You get a little bit of discount from the guys up top. And also, he's pretty easy to stack too, because there's direct guys like DeAndre Hopkins, and then you have Christian Kirk as a cheaper option as well. But I'm a big fan of Kyler Murray here, and I just like him as a quarterback in general. He's pretty funny to watch. Not funny to watch. He's pretty fun to watch, and the guy is just blazing fast. So you can definitely sign me up for some Kyler Murray this week, and I think he's excellent in cash games. Cam Newton, 6,700. Kind of like Kyler Murray. He's running the ball quite a bit. I know there was questions if he was going to run the ball in New England, and that's certainly been answered, as he has been running the ball quite a bit in New England. He's averaging 2 rushing touchdowns per game. He's got 11.5 rushing attempts per game and 61 rushing yards per game. So if you can get guys, especially in cash games, that are going to run the ball in addition to throwing the ball, they're going to make excellent, safe floor quarterbacks, which Cam Newton and Kyler Murray definitely check those boxes. Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson are also mobile quarterbacks, but they don't typically run the ball too much. Like Russell Wilson's only averaging 34 rushing attempts per game and 1 rushing attempt per game. And Dak Prescott's at 24 rushing yards per game with 2 rushing attempts. Now, Dak Prescott actually was stealing some goal line work from Zeke Elliott in week 2, which we can't expect him to keep stealing those rushing touchdowns down there. So if you own Zeke, I'm sure you guys were pretty tilted about that. But hey, it happens and it worked. But anyway, yeah, definitely like Cam Newton here. Versus the Raiders, it's kind of so-so. Last season, they were pretty awful versus the pass. So far this season, they're still 26 DVA versus the pass, 19.3 DK points per game, 290 passing yards. So I think Cam Newton's going to be fine here as a pretty big pass blocking advantage matchup here, according to PFF. So Cam Newton, $100 cheaper than Kyler Murray. I'd rather just play Kyler, to be honest, because I like that game a little bit better. But I think Cam's still fine. I mean, the rushing upside there, and he's going to get work on the goal line too. So can't really go wrong with Cam or any of the 4 quarterbacks I just mentioned. And then if you want a cheap option, we have Carson Wentz here at 5,800 going up against Cincinnati. Now, I know Carson Wentz has not been that great this season, but this has a pretty decent 46.5-point over-under. They also have a team total of 26.5, and they're 6.5-point favorites at home. Now, Miles Sanders, I prefer the run game here, but he also gets work in the passing game, so I wouldn't say it's a negative correlation playing Carson Wentz and Miles Sanders together. But I think Carson Wentz can get on the right track in this game. He hasn't exactly been excellent so far, but he is throwing the ball quite a bit. 42.5 pass attempts per game so far, 256 passing yards per game, 2 interceptions per game, which is pretty gross, but 1 passing touchdown. Nothing too spectacular here, and I much would rather play Miles Sanders over Carson Wentz. Like, I prefer the run game here, but again, Miles Sanders is involved in the passing game, and he's probably going to be one of the highest owned plays on the entire slate. But I do like Carson Wentz at this price tag, 5,800. You can use guys like Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz with him, even Jalen Reagor or Deshaun Jackson, so he's not really that hard to stack with. But Cincinnati, it's a pretty soft spot here. They made Baker Mayfield look pretty good on Thursday night. If you're looking at their numbers so far this season versus the past, they are 16th DVOA, only allowing 12.7 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks. But don't forget they did play Tyrod Taylor in week 1, so that number's going to be skewed a little bit. And I still think this is a pretty poor defense for the most part. So Carson Wentz at 5,800, I think he's a fine option. I think we'll move on to the running backs at this point. And we'll start up top here with Zeke Elliott at 8,300. We know he's going to get a ton of volume. And I just like getting exposure to this game. He's always got good chances of getting into the end zone because he's not going to come out near the goal line. And 4.5-point favorites, it does concern me a little bit that maybe they won't be able to establish the run too much, but that's Dallas's goal. They're going to run Zeke Elliott into the ground. He's also involved in the passing game as well. That's why I'm not really too concerned if this game happened to be where the Cowboys are trailing by 2 scores, which we saw in the Falcons game, but Zeke Elliott was still fine. He was involved in the ground, obviously, and he was involved through the air as well. He's getting 5.5 targets per game so far, 4.5 receptions per game. He's got a 13% target share, 22 rushing attempts per game, and 92 rushing yards per game. So the volume's going to be there. He's obviously one of the best running backs in the entire league. Now, Seattle, I wouldn't say it's a great matchup for Zeke. They are 20th DVA versus the run, but they're only allowing 19.6 DraftKings points per game to running backs so far and only 46 rushing yards per game. So definitely a cakewalk matchup here, but it's still Zeke Elliott, one of the best running backs in the league. We know he's one of the safest options because of the volume he gets each and every single week, and he's always going to be involved in the passing game. But not a great run blocking advantage here for the Cowboys, according to PFF so far. It's early on in the week, but still a minus 47% run blocking, I guess, disadvantage to PFF this week. So that could be a little bit of a concern. I don't think he's a must on this slate. I prefer the passing game in this game just because, 55.5 point over-under should be some fireworks there. And there's definitely some other cheaper running backs we can use, so I don't think he's a must, but still a fine option. Derrick Henry, 7,800. I like to call this a post-hype play because everyone in the world, including me, I absolutely loved Derrick Henry last week. We all liked him, and we all played him, and he was like 80% in cash games, and he busted. He scored 8.3, 8.5, 8.6 points, something like that. He still had over 80 rushing yards, but we needed it a little bit more, and it was a fantastic matchup, and it just did not really work out. So if you want to get on the post-hype train with Derrick Henry at lower ownership, I think it's still a pretty good matchup here versus Minnesota. They have not looked great this season. Jonathan Taylor had a fantastic game versus them last weekend, and I don't see why we can't go back to the Derrick Henry well for tournaments. I don't really think he's a lock for cash games by any means, but in tournaments, people that are very high owned the week prior and they bust are going to be lower owned the next week, and he's still at a similar price point here in this matchup versus Minnesota. It's not scary at all. They've been a defense we've been picking on the first 2 weeks of the season. If you look at the matchup overall, they're allowing 30 DraftKings points per game to running backs, 140 rushing yards per game, and a 22nd DVOA versus the run. Also a pretty big run blocking matchup advantage here for the Tennessee Titans. And Derrick Henry, we know he's going to get the volume, 28 rushing attempts per game so far, 2 targets per game, and 100 rushing yards per game. So Derrick Henry, I like him in tournaments just as I don't think he's going to go too low because people are going to realize, yeah, he didn't score into the end zone, and Ryan Tannehill's not going to throw a bunch of touchdowns each and every single week. So I think people are still going to play Derrick Henry, but he's definitely going to be much lower owned than he was last week, and I think that makes him fine for tournaments because he's going to get around 30 touches each and every single game, and he's going to end up finding the end zone. Jonathan Taylor, 7,000. I told you guys this price is only going up as the season progresses, and it's all the way up to 7,000, which is, I believe, $1,300 more than it was last week. But the Jets defense is not something I want to be too concerned about here, and the Colts have a 27 implied team total here at home, and they're also massive 10.5 point favorites. So Jonathan Taylor should have another good week here, and he's got a great offensive line. I'm pretty sure PFF has this as one of the best run blocking advantage matchups of the week, which that is correct. 72% advantage for the Colts, which is absolutely massive. And the Jets, they're 16th DVOA versus the run this season, allowing 31 DraftKings points per game to running backs, 112 rushing yards per game. But the 49ers kind of ate them up. Raheem Mostert had an 80-yard touchdown to start the game. Jerick McKinnon had 70-some yards on 3 carries. And then, I can't remember what else happened, but Jonathan Taylor here. Minshew, great for DFS purposes. He had 26 rushing attempts last game, 101 yards, got into the end zone. Only had 2 targets, but they did have this game in hand for a while. Then they kind of used Jordan Wilkins at the end, so it would have been even more touches if Jonathan Taylor, for Jonathan Taylor if this game stayed close. So I think he's another smash spot here. I'm not really concerned about that price tag. I actually think it's a fair price tag, and it would not surprise me if he got closer to 8K as the season goes on. So definitely don't mind Jonathan Taylor. He's probably still just a little bit too cheap. And if this game is staying close, he's going to get those Phillip Rivers dump-offs, which is always valuable for DFS. Then dropping down to Austin Ekeler here at 6,800. So I think him and Joshua Kelly are both playable, but I'm kind of iffy on these guys. If Kelly didn't exist, I think Austin Ekeler is probably one of the best plays at running back this week because he's going against Carolina. But the problem is that Josh Kelly does exist, and these guys are both going to get a ton of work. They both got around 20 touches last week, and I'm not sure who the quarterback's going to be. I think Herbert's going to be starting, and if he is, that's only going to be better for the offense as a whole because Tyrod Taylor is just not a very good quarterback. So we'll have to see who starts. But Austin Ekeler, it's still a nuts matchup here versus Carolina. They are pretty much going to be the worst defense of the league this season, if I had to guess. They're 32nd DVOA versus the run, which was the case last season as well. They're allowing nearly... It's crazy to say, but nearly 50 DraftKings points per game to running backs so far, 121 rushing yards per game, and 3 rushing touchdowns. And look, it's a great matchup for the running backs here for the Chargers. I think one of these guys has a good game. I think both can probably have good games. And I think when we get to Kelly, I think he's a decent pivot off of a probably decently chalky Mike Davis. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Austin Ekeler, he's fine. He's a capable pass catcher. I just have worries that they are 7-point favorites. So I really don't think he's going to have to be involved in the passing game too much, but which could lead to more Josh Kelly instead of Austin Ekeler. But I certainly think both are viable this week. But Miles Sanders, 6,400. This is probably going to be the chalk this week. Cincinnati has struggled versus the run game so far this season. And Miles Sanders looked excellent in his first game. He missed week 1, but in week 2, he was fantastic. At 95 rushing yards, 20 rushing attempts, got into the end zone, 4.8 yards per carry, and he was also heavily involved in the passing game too, which is why I said he's not really that much of a negative correlation if you're playing Carson Wentz. I mean, I don't love it. I'm not really looking to play Carson Wentz and pair him with Miles Sanders, but it's not the worst thing you can do in the world. He had 7 targets, only caught 3 of them, but 36 receiving yards. And look, this is a great spot versus Cincy. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt just absolutely destroyed this defense last week, and their 30th DVOA versus the run so far, allowing nearly 40 DraftKings points per game to running backs, 179 rushing yards per game, and 2 rushing touchdowns per game. So Miles Sanders is 6,400. I think he's a pretty easy plug-and-play, and it would not surprise me if he's one of the highest-owned plays on the entire slate here. And a 46.5 point total in this game, which is pretty good, and 26.5 implied team total for the Philadelphia Eagles. So love Miles Sanders here. I think he's an excellent option. Kenyon Drake at 6,000. So I definitely like a lot of the Cardinals here. I love Hopkins. I love Kirk. I love Kenyon Drake, and I love Kyler Murray. Although I will say Kenyon Drake has not been super impressive this season. We'll get into his numbers. But again, a 30-point implied team total here, 5.5-point favorites at home. And one of these games, I should say, Kenyon Drake is going to bust one loose. He has yet to do that this season. But still, like, he's getting 18 rushing attempts per game, had 20 carries last week, only 73 rushing yards per game. But he's still going to be fine. He's also a capable pass catcher, only getting 2 targets per game right now. But look, at 6,000, I think he's fine here. I mean, points are going to be scored from the Cardinals, and it would not surprise me if Kenyon Drake gets into the end zone here. So I'm all aboard Kenyon Drake at 6,000. I wouldn't say I love pairing him with Kyler Murray, but again, these guys are both playable in the same lineup. But this is a pretty good matchup here versus Detroit. They're 24th DVOA versus the run this season, allowing nearly 38 DraftKings points per game to running backs on 176 rushing yards per game. And they just get absolutely destroyed by Aaron Jones. I'm not saying Kenyon Drake's on Aaron Jones' level, but still, I mean, they just got destroyed by him last week. And then going out of Mike Davis here at 5,100. So unfortunately for everyone that drafted him first overall, and just unfortunately for football fans in general, because Christian McCaffrey is fun to watch, one of the better players in the NFL, he's going to miss quite a few weeks, looking like about a month to about a month and a half here. They said 4 to 6 weeks. So Mike Davis is going to step in as the lead back here. Now, looking at his numbers is kind of useless because week 1 he obviously didn't do anything. But if you're looking at last week, he only had 1 rushing attempt, but he also had 8 catches for 74 yards on 8 targets. So he's a capable pass catcher. And if at 5,100 you can catch the ball and you're going to get a majority of the touches here in the backfield, probably going to get around 20 touches, I will take it at 5,100. I mean, I know he's probably not the most talented back in the world, but the volume and opportunity is certainly going to be there, and that trumps most things in NFL DFS. So definitely don't mind Mike Davis there at only 5,100 just because, look, he's going to get some targets, he's going to get some carries, and he's pretty cheap. And last season, the Chargers were pretty susceptible against the run game. So now we'll drop down to Joshua Kelly, or Josh Kelly, whatever you prefer. I think he's an interesting pivot off of Mike Davis because if he's going to be popular, and if Jerick McKinnon's going to be popular, I think Kelly's going to be in a range where people are going to probably skip over him. I think Austin Eckler's probably going to have more ownership as well. But looking at Kelly's numbers last week, he had 23 rushing attempts and 3 targets, which is obviously the most in the passing game is going to go to Austin Eckler, but still he had over 20 carries, only 64 yards, and not getting to the end zone. But still, if he's going to get like 15 to 20 carries or just even 15 to 20 touches here versus the Carolina Panthers, the worst run defense in all of football, and they are 7-point favorites here at home, so I think they should have the game in hand. And if they want to ride Josh Kelly at the end, just to run out the clock, I think that's certainly viable in tournaments. I really wouldn't go there in cash games, but I think he's a decent pivot off of Mike Davis if he's going to end up being popular, and Jerick McKinnon as well. Then dropping down Jerick McKinnon, he's only 4,900, and it's going to grade out as a pretty good value this week going up against the Giants. Tevin Coleman's hurt. He's going to miss a couple of weeks, and then Raheem Mostert's also hurt as well. So it's pretty much just going to be Jerick McKinnon here, and Jeff Wilson and the practice squad guy, what's his name, Jermichael Hasty, something like that. So, but at 4,900, if he's going to get us double-digit touches, I think that's fine because the Giants' defense is obviously not that very good. They did struggle versus the run last season. So far this year, they are 15th DVOA versus the run, allowing only 23 DraftKings points per game to running backs, but over 100 rushing yards per game. And like at 4,900, if he's going to get me double-digit touches, I will take Jerick McKinnon there. I'm not sure if they're going to let him get a full workload here because obviously he's a couple of years removed from injury. But he has put up 2 solid fantasy games in a row with limited volume. Like, he only had 3 carries in week 1, but he did have 3 catches and also caught a receiving touchdown on 5 targets. Then the next week, obviously it was last week, he had 3 carries for 77 yards, which mostly came on that, third and 31, he had like a 55-yard run somehow. Only the Jets, and had a rushing touchdown too. So he's ended with 13.7 and 13.4 fantasy points, which, again, you can't expect that on low volume. But the volume should be up this week, and versus the Giants at 4,900, I think that's going to be fine as long as we can get like confirmation he's going to be like pretty much the lead back here and going to get majority of the touches. I'll move on to the wide receiver position, which you're going to see a lot of Seahawks and Cowboys guys here just because they're kind of underpriced for the most part. We'll start up top with DeAndre Hopkins. He comes in at 7,900, and again, I want exposure to the Cardinals. They have a 30-point implied team total. They're playing at home. They play pretty fast. and a 54.5-point over-under, which is only a tick below the Cowboys and Seahawks game. But yeah, definitely like DeAndre Hopkins, kind of like Devontae Adams numbers, where he's going to get majority of the volume. Now, unfortunately, last week, if you played him, Devontae Adams really didn't even play in the second half for the most part because of the injury, and they were up so much, so they didn't even need to use him. So that unfortunately sucked big time, but still, 109 receiving yards per game, 11 catches per game, 12.5 targets. He's pretty much catching everything they throw at him. 35% target share, 73% weighted opportunity share. Not a high ADOT at all, of only 5.6, but he's going to get the volume. He's obviously a fine pairing with Kyler Murray if you're looking at how the Lions are doing versus the pass this season. Nothing too pretty. 24th DVA versus the pass, 35.7 DK points per game, 173 receiving yards per game, and 1 receiving touchdown. So I think Hopkins is certainly fine there. And then dropping down to one of the Cowboys guys, Amari Cooper. This is pretty much just a smash spot for all those guys. So I don't know if you noticed it when I was looking at the matchup for the Lions, but look at what the Seahawks are doing with wide receivers this season. They're 29th DVA versus the pass. They're allowing 73.5 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers this season. I thought it was a mistake. I thought like there was an error when I was pulling some numbers, but from what I have, this is correct. 365 receiving yards per game to wide receivers and a receiving touchdown per game. I mean, they are getting absolutely torched. Yeah, they played some good offenses so far. Well, I wouldn't say the Patriots are like the most prolific offense, but Cam Newton shredded those guys with Julian Edelman and company, and then Matt Ryan, obviously. I mean, he's just going to throw the ball a ton every single week, but still, they've gotten killed through the air so far. And Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup are a very talented group of wide receivers, so I think we can certainly target these guys, and they're all underpriced for the most part. I didn't have Michael Gallup on here just because I didn't list everybody, but you can start all of them. Amari Cooper, he comes in at 6,500 again, super high over-under. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but just know we want exposure to this game. The Cowboys also play very fast. They're playing at the fastest pace of play so far this season at 20 seconds per play. If looking at Cooper's numbers, he had an amazing catch last week, and I think at first I thought Dak Prescott missed him in stride, but it looked like Amari Cooper kind of prematurely jumped a little bit, and then he kind of one-hand snagged it, which, I mean, it looked cool, but I think if he would have just kept on running, it could have been like a 70-yard touchdown for the most part, so that kind of sucked that didn't happen. But it was still a nice catch nonetheless. But still, 11 targets per game, 8 catches, 90 receiving yards per game, 27% target share. Overall, very solid numbers here. 233 air yards, so he's getting the ball down the field. And look, I like all the Cowboys here for the most part, and I like all the Seahawks too. I mean, definitely want exposure to this game, but it should be fireworks for the most part. DK Metcalf, 6,500. Like, I'd rather just play Amari Cooper. He feels a bit safer than DK Metcalf here, and he's pretty much getting double the targets that Metcalf is, but he's a guy that can go boom for sure. I mean, he's not really a boom or bust guy either. He's kind of just like a medium or boost, or not boost, a medium or boom play, because the guy looks awesome. Obviously, he's just an athletic freak. I mean, looking at everything. I mean, the guy's just absolutely awesome. He can burn a defense deep. High ADOT guy, if you're looking at his numbers this year. See if I can pull him up really quick. He's got a 48% market share of the team's air yards, 14.9 ADOT, 209 air yards. He's got a receiving touchdown per game so far. He's scored in the first 2 weeks, and 93 receiving yards per game. And both of his touchdowns were on some pretty deep plays. So I like DK Metcalf here going up against the Dallas Cowboys. And again, this game is going to be very high scoring. So getting DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett in your lineup is definitely a good way to go if you're using Russell Wilson just to get exposure and Murray just to stack him up with them. And Tyler Lockett, kind of a similar play here, although he's usually a guy that's going to get more volume than DK Metcalf, but I wouldn't say he's got the same kind of boom upside that DK Metcalf does, but Tyler Lockett is pretty safe. He's getting 8 targets per game, pretty much catching everything he's getting. That's 7.5 receptions per game, 79 receiving yards per game, half a touchdown per game, 26% target share. Not the air yards that DK Metcalf quite has, but I think is a safe option here. And again, I just want exposure to the Seahawks and Cowboys game if I can. Although I do like the Cardinals game as well, so I don't think you absolutely have to play this game because, I mean, the Cardinals game's right there, kind of right up there with them with the over-under and the implied team total. But definitely like exposure to this game with 2 pretty strong offenses. Terry McLaurin at 5,900. So not the Redskins, the Washington football team are 7-point dogs on the road here in Cleveland. And Cleveland's offense actually looked pretty darn good last week. So if they're going to play to their potential, the football team should be trailing in this game, which means they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. And this is a pretty beatable secondary. We saw Joe Burrow have nearly 400 passing yards. Now keep in mind, he did throw the ball 61 times. But still, I mean, this is a beatable defense. And Terry McLaurin is a very talented wide receiver. If you're looking at his numbers this season, yeah, he's getting held back by Dwayne Haskins. But 8 targets per game, 93 receiving yards per game, at 26% target share, 180 air yards, and 10.6 ADOT. Man, if he had a good quarterback, Terry McLaurin would be absolutely awesome. I mean, the guys, if you just watch the film on him, he's obviously really good. But I'd love to see him with a good quarterback. But anyways, this is a good matchup versus the Cleveland Browns. They're 30th DVOA versus the pass this season, allowing 1.5 receiving touchdowns per game, 44.6 DraftKings points per game, and nearly 200 receiving yards per game. So I think Terry McLaurin is fine. T.Y. Hilton, 5,600. There's not going to be any Paris Campbell, so the target should be centered on him. And I know last week wasn't pretty. He did drop a touchdown, though. Keep that in mind. I can't expect him to drop touchdowns. But to be honest, I'm more interested in the running game here with Jonathan Taylor because they are 10.5-point favorites at home. I realize to be a 10.5-point favorites, these are going to have to score, and T.Y. Hilton can certainly be a part of that. But I just don't feel like it's going to have to be like a huge T.Y. Hilton game. But he's fine here just kind of as a post-hype guy because I know a lot of people were kind of liking T.Y. Hilton last week, including me. Again, he didn't really do much. But the Jets, I mean, they're a pretty pitiful team so far this year. And they've been a bottom half team when it comes to pass defense this season. If I can just pull up the exact numbers, they're 22nd DVOA versus the pass, allowing over 35 DraftKings points per game and nearly 200 receiving yards per game to wide receivers. So I don't mind T.Y. Hilton, but I do prefer the run game with Jonathan Taylor. Deontay Johnson, 5,400. This guy is getting a ton of targets from Ben Roethlisberger, and I think he's still way too cheap here at 5,400. Has had 2 good games in a row. But on the season, getting a lot of targets, 31% target share, 71% weighted opportunity share. Not really getting the ball downfield too much, but still 10.5 targets per game, 7 receptions per game, and 74 receiving yards. I think he's going to have a breakout season, and I know the Vegas total of 45 is not that inviting, but Houston has a pretty poor defense for the most part, looking at their numbers. 23rd DVOA versus the pass this season. Now, been a little bit strong versus wide receivers, 31.8 DraftKings points per game, 126 receiving yards per game, but still, Deontay Johnson should be fine here. He's got a good individual matchup here according to PFF, and overall, I like Deontay Johnson, so I like that price tag, and I think he's certainly fine. CeeDee Lamb, 5,400. Again, I think this guy's just a little bit too cheap here, and I don't think it's far-fetched to say he's the best wide receiver on this team. I saw some people saying that. I was listening to a podcast that said that as well, and I was like, you know what? I can kind of get behind that. CeeDee Lamb looks really good now. Overall, I'd probably say Mark Cooper is the best wide receiver on that team, but CeeDee Lamb, I think this guy's going to be excellent. Not that that's a hot take or anything, but he certainly looks really good out there, and if you look at the numbers this season, he's certainly getting the ball, 7.5 targets per game, 5.5 catches, 82 receiving yards per game, only 17% target share, low 8 out and a lot of air yards, but the Seahawks are getting absolutely torched by receivers this season, so I think CeeDee Lamb at 5,400 is certainly viable. Then Christian Kirk, this is just getting like a cheap stacking option with Kyler Murray. I know he hasn't really done much this season. I think he only had 2 catches last week, only averaging 1.5 receptions per game, 4 targets per game, and only 28 receiving yards per game with a 12% target share. He's got an 8 out of 20.1 in those few targets he's gotten so far. But look, he's cheap. He's a fine pairing with Kyler Murray, 30-point implied team total, so I think he's okay at 4,500. N'Keal Harry at 4,200. He's pretty cheap here, only 4,200, and look, he's getting 8.5 targets per game so far. He's got a 30% target share, 29 if we get specific, 6.5 catches per game, and 55 receiving yards per game. Looking at the matchup versus the Rams, they're at 26 DVOA versus the pass this season. I apologize, not the Rams. Sorry, the Las Vegas Raiders. They're 26 DVOA versus the pass this season and 32.5 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, which isn't great, but still, N'Keal Harry's super cheap. And if you want to use him with Cam Newton, which, look, you don't have to pair most of the quarterbacks I mentioned with wide receivers because they have rushing upside. Like guys like Josh Allen, Cam Newton, Kyler Murray, you can all play them naked just because they have that rushing upside. But I mean, only 4,200. N'Keal Harry's fine here. Then KJ Hamler at 3,000, the bare minimum. I think he's actually pretty interesting here. Sorry, the video cut really quick, but we were talking about KJ Hamler, who is the absolute bare minimum this weekend, and he actually had 7 targets last week with only 3 catches and 48 yards. It's somewhat interesting here. And with Courtland Sutton being out, he's going to get some more looks. So at the bare minimum, it's fine. I love the matchup versus Tampa Bay. They got a pretty strong defense. They're good versus the run, and they're good versus the pass now, so I wouldn't say I'm too excited here. Pretty big disadvantage here according to PFF versus Dean. They are 60 versus the pass this season. But at only 3,000, you don't need much. And if this guy's going to get 5 to 10 targets here, I don't think that's bad at 3,000. It's going to be a little tough to trust him. But at $3,000, you can't really ask for too much. So I don't mind Hamlin there. Hamlin, and Hamler at that price tag. Then moving on to tight ends, we have Darren Waller at 5,700, who absolutely destroyed me on Monday Night Football. I liked him on the showdown slate, but in my personal home league, the one I play on Sleeper, that app, I was up by 30 points, and then Darren Waller drops like 31 on my head. Absolutely destroyed me, but he had a fantastic game, and Like I said, he was the receiving option I felt the safest with, and I didn't think he was going to do that well, but he absolutely crushed. And if you're looking at his numbers this season, I mean, they're going to top most charts here at 38% target share, for tight ends, that is. An 81% weighted opportunity share, a 32% market share of the team's air yards, which isn't great considering he has a 5.6 ADOT. But still, 74 receiving yards per game, 11.5 targets per game, and 9 receptions per game. This game actually got a 47.5 point over-under as well, which is not too bad. Only a 20.75 applied team total for the Raiders. But look, the volume's here for Darren Waller, and he's one of the most talented tight ends in the entire league. So I think he is fine despite the matchup versus New England maybe not being the best. But if you look at the numbers this season, they are 24th DVA versus the pass. Now, they're only allowing 4 Draftkings points per game, 2 tight ends, and 19.5 receiving yards per game. But I still think Darren Waller will be fine. Then Noah Fant, 5,400. Guys I think he's gonna have a breakout years. I mean, he's looked great in the first 2 starts, and he's getting 4.5 catches per game and 5.5 targets, which isn't great. He's also gonna have Jeff Driscoll throwing the ball, but still, I mean, no Cortland Sutton, so there's gonna be receptions to go around. So Noah Fant should benefit from that. Only 15% target share this season, but he's getting the ball down the field with a 9.6 ADOT. But I'm just interested in the talent for the most part. Again, the matchup versus Tampa Bay is not going to be great, but I think Noah Fant will be okay, especially without Cortland Sutton. Jonnu Smith, it's looking like A.J. Brown's not going to play once again, and we saw Jonnu Smith have an absolute monster game last week. With A.J. Brown not in the lineup, he's got 2 touchdowns, and he looked great. He's averaging 1.5 touchdowns per game now, 18% target share. 60 receiving yards per game, not getting a whole lot of volume. 6 targets per game, which is obviously not even close to Darren Waller. So for only $500 more, you can get a guy that's getting double-digit targets per game so far. In the first 2 weeks, I'd rather do that. But Jonnu's fine. We've been picking on Minnesota this season. Well, I know I say this season, it's only been 2 weeks. So Mo Alley Cox, I think he had, 111 receiving yards last time versus Minnesota. So I think Jonnu Smith will be fine as long as A.J. Brown's out. If A.J. Brown is in, I'll pass on Jonnu Smith at 5,200. But they have a pretty healthy 24.75 applied team total here, 47.5 point over-under. Both teams have been playing pretty fast so far this season, so I think Smith is fine. Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, kind of the same player at this point. Dallas Goedert's actually been doing a little bit better so far with 8 targets per game compared to Zach Ertz 7. 6 catches per game as well, and 65 receiving yards per game. Also, he has the same amount of touchdowns as Zach Ertz. He also has a higher target share at 20%, more air yards, not a higher ADOT, but still Dallas Goedert's kind of been the guy you've wanted over Zach Ertz for the most part. I think both are pretty much the same play here, so if you want to use Ertz over Goedert, I don't mind that. If you want to use Goedert over Zach Ertz, I don't mind that either. I'd probably just play Zach Ertz just because of the name. I'd feel safer with it, but both are certainly viable here, and they're pretty much the same price tags. And I think one of these guys is going to have a pretty solid game versus Cincy, and actually both of them could, so I don't think just one will. But I think at least one of these guys is going to have a good game versus Cincinnati, and they're a pretty easy pairing option with Carson Wentz. And if we're looking at their numbers this season, of how they did versus the past, 16th DVOA, allowing 10.5 points per game to tight ends, but I still think they should have a solid game. And Logan Thomas, 3,700, still got volume last week, 8.5 targets per game through the first 2 weeks this season. 4 catches, 31 receiving yards, but a 26% target share, a 25% market share of the team's air yards, and 134 yards and an ADOT of 7.9. So he's going to get volume here, and the Washington football team should be trailing this game. They are 7-point dogs on the road, only an 18.5 point implied team total, which is not pretty. But Cleveland hasn't been great versus tight ends thus far. They are allowing 25.4 DraftKings points per game to the position in their 30th DVA versus the pass, and they're allowing 74 receiving yards per game, 2 tight ends, and 1.5 touchdowns per game as well. So Logan Thomas, only 37. I like the spot quite a bit. And as for the defenses, it's kind of just throw in whoever fits. Colts, they're expensive, but they're going up against the Jets, who have looked awful this season. They're 10.5 point favorites at home, and only a 16.5 point over, or well, not a 16.5 point over under, 16.5 point implied team total for the Jets. Buccaneers, they've looked pretty good, and they're going up against Jeff Driscoll, and they've lost Cortland Sutton, so I think they're a pretty solid play as well, even though they're going to be playing on the road in Mile High, which is not always optimal, but still think they'll be okay. 49ers, they did lose Nick Bosa and some other guys on defense, so it's not pretty, but they are going against Daniel Jones, who still have one of the lowest implied team totals on the slate despite the injuries. And the Eagles, it's a little tough to trust, but they're going against Cincinnati, which Joe Burrow did look good, but he's still a rookie quarterback, and they're 6.5 point favorites at home, and they're only 2,800, so I still think they are going to be viable. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. And I'll see you guys in the Thursday Night Football Showdown video, which I will post tomorrow.